Hello, cruel, cruel world. My name is Dr. 𝐏𝐬𝐲𝐡 𝐅𝐨𝐫. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I assess mentally disordered offenders for a living so that you don't have to. You can call me the ominous 𝐏𝐬𝐼𝐽. So, what is dissociative identity disorder? What isn't dissociative identity disorder? What causes it? Is it in fact real? Do I believe in it? And what is an infamous landmark case of it being faked by a serial killer? I'm going to answer all of these questions and so much more in today's episode of A Psych for Sore Minds. So let's start with the basics. Dissociative identity disorder is also known as multiple personality disorder, and it is a complex psychological condition that is caused by many factors. But by far the most significant factor is severe trauma during early childhood. And it's usually very extreme. It's usually quite repetitive, so it can be physical, sexual, or even emotional abuse. But here's the thing, it's a contentious diagnosis because it is really, really rare. It is as rare as, what's that expression? Hen's fangs. Also, it's faked by many criminals who try to kind of dissolve themselves of criminal responsibility. So if somebody is accused of a serious offence, it's exactly the kind of case that needs expertise from somebody such as myself, a failing wannabe YouTuber. Such as myself, a forensic psychiatrist. So let's take it back to the concrete screech. Let's deep dive. What exactly is dissociative identity disorder? It's a severe form of dissociation. So what is dissociation? That's like a disconnection between a person's thoughts and their memories, and also their feelings, their actions, and even their own sense of identity. It used to be called multiple personality disorder. You've probably heard of that term. The theory is that for the people that suffer with this, it's a coping mechanism for trauma experienced by that person. So they literally shut themselves off or disassociate themselves from experiences that are too violent or too traumatic or like too painful to even associate in the first place and to assimilate into their conscious self and into their minds. And that happens particularly during early childhood years where emotional neglect or life-threatening disturbances or traumas occur at that sensitive stage in life, developmental stage, so usually before the age of 6 is when the trauma occurs. So when I'm talking about this dissociation and this lack of memory, this is beyond bog standard embarrassment or like painful memories. I'm not talking about when you snogged Steve from accounts at your office Christmas party and just wish that you could disassociate yourself from this. This is involuntary and it's unconscious. By the way, Steve says hi, asked you to give him a call. Okay, so what isn't dissociative identity disorder? A very common misconception is that this is schizophrenia. So schizophrenia many, many times gets called multiple personality disorder, but that's a complete fallacy. So schizophrenia is a different mental illness. Schizophrenia is a tendency to have periods of psychosis. Psychosis being stepping outside of reality for a temporary period of time. And there are a few different symptoms, but by far the most common are auditory hallucinations, hearing voices, and paranoid delusions, particularly in the patient group that I see as a forensic psychiatrist who have committed offences. So schizophrenia is completely different to the experience of dissociation. If you want to know more, go and check out my videos on what schizophrenia is, and also I've done a whole series on hearing voices, including real life cases of some criminal defendants who have been driven by hearing voices. Always be plugging. So periods of dissociation are different. They tend to come in a couple of different forms, being derealization and depersonalization. So the difference between those two is that derealization is this overwhelming feeling that everything around you is fake, is not real. So the way that it looks, the way that it feels, the way that it sounds, it just doesn't seem real to you. It's kind of like a dreamlike state. Whereas depersonalization is similar, but not the same. Depersonalization is when you yourself feel that you're not real, but everything around you is. So there are more different types of symptoms, but those are the most common. So dissociation can be a standalone disorder that's not got the identity bit with it. So dissociation, what I've just described, can occur in other illnesses, such as in severe depression. It can even be related to heavy drug use, particularly ketamine, or so I've heard. Dissociative identity disorder is characterized by the presence of two or more distinct split identities or personality states. And crucially, they continually have control over the person's behavior. So it's basically the dude from Split, featuring Professor X. With dissociative identity disorder, there's also an inability to recall key personal bits of information. So sometimes the alters, which is the name for the different identities, they might have their own age, gender, race. Sometimes they have their own different kind of ways of posturing, of gesturing. They have their different favourite Spice Girl, and they have their different distinct way of talking. And each personality reveals itself and controls the individual's behaviours and thoughts. And this is called switching. Switch! That's switching can last for anything between seconds to minutes to even days. So, because it's associated with identity confusion and also identity alteration, it gives the person a sense of confusion about their identity, a confusion of who they actually are. So it's postulated that this could, in theory, make them not criminally responsible if they've been charged with an offence. And here lies the problems, my Psych for Sore guys and gals. Some psychiatrists don't believe that it's actually a legitimate disorder because it's extremely rare and because it's often faked. And it's also quite difficult to distinguish objectively somebody saying that they have these different personality states compared to, for example, somebody hearing voices, which you can kind of see if they're responding to external stimuli. So from my experience, so as I mentioned, I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. I work as an expert witness. So typically my case might be that I see somebody on remand who's in prison. So let's say they've been charged with like GBH or murder, and my role is to decide whether they're mentally ill. For example, for a psychiatric defence of not guilty by reason of insanity. So from my experience, when a defendant is faking, which happens, I wouldn't say very infrequently, but certainly frequently enough, a few times a year, the most common trick they try to use is they say that they're hearing voices. And if not, then it's the second most common is probably that they have a complete memory lapse of the event, so they can't tell me their kind of intentions or thought processes. And a little bit below that, but still in a strong third place, is that it wasn't me, that it was a different personality, that somebody comes and controls my actions and my thoughts. And, it's like an alter. They say that they've got this alter. So it wasn't me, doctor, it was Professor X. By the way, see my series on faking mental illness when I talk about some of my real life cases. Always be plugging. So now that you know why it's a contentious diagnosis, we have to ask the question, my Psych for Sore guys and gals, do I personally believe in dissociative identity disorder? Well, I suppose my answer is that I'm more of agnostic than an atheist. So in my career, I've seen at least 5 people who I believe have been faking this diagnosis, and I personally have never seen a legitimate case. But if I did, then I would be open-minded enough to accept it, to believe in it. So for me, it's kind of like the same concept as God or ghosts or even Santa Claus. I need to see them first before I believe they exist. By the way, Santa Claus definitely exists. I know, I met him when I was 6 once during Christmas. He's a nice guy. He's a bit kind of browner around the face than I was expecting, and I have to say he looks a lot more like my dad than I was expecting. Okay, now I've given you some actual background information. Let's deep dive into a real-life high-profile case of a serial killer. If you're a true crime fan, then you probably are ahead of me. I'm about to talk about the Hillside Strangler, who is thought to be one, but later discovered to be 2 different American serial killers who were working in tandem. They terrorized Los Angeles between October 1977 and February 1978. And the reason they got this moniker was because many of the victims' bodies were discovered in the hills surrounding the city. So the perpetrators were eventually discovered to be cousins called Kenneth Bianchi and Angelo Buono Jr., who were later convicted of torturing, sexually assaulting, and murdering 10 women and girls ranging in age between 12 and 23. So this is where our story takes an interesting twist. Kenneth Bianchi managed to dupe several mental health experts because Bianchi's attorney brought in a psychiatrist to examine him, and this doctor put Bianchi under hypnosis and got him to admit to several of the murders and to implicate his cousin. So the courts thought that they got a win. But the psychiatrist also declared that Bianchi had multiple personality disorder, which, as I've told you, pay attention kids, was the old name for dissociative identity disorder. So Bianchi had apparently killed his, it wasn't him that did it, it was his alter personality, a man called Steve Walker, not the most terrifying of names, and was therefore not competent to stand trial. And amazingly, 3 other experts were brought into the trial to assess him, and they all concurred, they all agreed with this condition. I have to say I'm a bit embarrassed that my psychiatry brethren are so easily duped. I mean, how can they be so gullible and naive? I'm tempted to find them and to fly over with my private jet with all the money that will be going into my account today from this Nigerian prince that I met on Facebook. But one very clever clinician caught him out. So, how was the trickster tricked? How was the con man conned? How was the wool puller's wool pulled? I'm about to tell you, but before I do, I'd like to introduce you to my channel, 𝐏𝐬𝐲𝐜𝐡 𝐅𝐸𝐬𝐬, the channel you're watching right now. So I cover a smorgasbord of topics related to criminality with a sprinkling of mental illness. So sometimes I cover trending or celebrity cases like R. Kelly, is Boris Johnson a narcissist, my psychoanalysis of Tommy Robinson. Sometimes I do more high profile cases or psychiatric illnesses like this very episode. As I said before, my name is Dr. 𝐏𝐬𝐲𝐜𝐡. I'm a consultant forensic psychiatrist. So I also act as an expert witness. As I mentioned before, I give experts evidence in trials about psychiatric illnesses. There's something for everybody on this channel. I am your favourite London-based Asian gold-tooth forensic psychiatrist YouTuber, or at least in your top 3. You got to admit it. I implore you to subscribe to this channel because not only does it help me out immeasurably, but it actually guarantees that you'll never step in dog doo-doo for the rest of your life, guaranteed, or your money back. Okay, let's get back to the episode. So the prosecution in this case of Bianchi, Hillside Strangler, they hired an expert called Dr. Martin 𝐏𝐬𝐬 to examine Bianchi. And 𝐏𝐬𝐬 was a sharp cookie. He believed that Bianchi had been faking what he was saying under hypnosis. So he suggested to Bianchi that most multiples in this multiple personality disorder have more than 2 personalities, and then amazingly, a 3rd personality emerged almost immediately called Billy. Also not the most terrifying name. So Bianchi even pretended in one of his sessions to touch somebody that wasn't actually present. And since it's known that visual hallucinations were not considered an aspect of multiple personality disorder, that's how 𝐏𝐬𝐬 knew that Bianchi was faking it. So basically, under pressure, 𝐏𝐬𝐬 forced Bianchi to admit to the deception, and eventually they struck a plea deal. So Bianchi was finally snatched by the powerful, gracious grasp of justice. Well, yeah, something like that. Okay, I'm about to come to the end. Before I conclude, my psych for sore guys and gals, do you believe in dissociative identity disorder? Maybe you actually know of a credible case, maybe a friend or a family member, maybe even you yourself, or your alter. Let me know in the comment section below. Am I being reasonable about what I said about being skeptical about whether it exists or not, being an agnostic? Am I being stubborn? Am I being short-sighted? Let me know. To conclude, let's address what we learned today, kids. So my intention, by the way, for telling you all this background is because I want to get you to start thinking like a forensic psychiatrist. Also to take over the world, but it's not going so well. What did we learn? Dissociative identity disorder is known as multiple personality disorder. We've learned that it's a complex psychological condition that's caused by many different factors. We know that it includes severe trauma during early childhood. We know that it's usually extreme form of trauma, so it's repetitive, physical, sexual, emotional trauma, and it's associated with dissociation, which can be derealization, not believing everything around you is real, or depersonalization, not believing you're real, but everything around you is. And that's just dissociation. Those are the symptoms of dissociation. The DID, dissociative identity disorder, is characterized by the presence of 2 or more distinct split identities or personality states, and they have control over the person's behavior. And for that reason, it can be used to it can be faked to excuse somebody's actions during a criminal trial, which is one of the reasons it's contentious. Hope you all understood all of that. Hope it was educational and entertaining. Subscribe to my channel. I need more subscribers. I need attention because I'm a very fragile, egotistical man. Come see me at Glasgow Crime Con. This is a massive true crime convention where you'll hear from a number of expert speakers such as psychiatrists, detectives, investigators, people from the FBI, a whole load of podcasters. Buy my goddamn book, I insist, and have a blessed day. And do not forget, whatever happens, stay euthymic, and I love you.